All right. This month's Daf Yomi is sponsored by the Durbach Abudi and Mandel families in honor of the engagement of Shaul Harris to Meir Mandel. May they build a bias Neman B'Yisrael filled with Torah, Simcha, and Bracha. Tonight's Malav Malka, pizza and fries, sponsored by Rabbi Yehuda Greenwood. Thank you very much. Lilo Nishmas, Sor Gittel Bas Dov, Yehuda Race's mother, and in honor of Shaul Harris's engagement to Meir Mandel. Shkoyach, very good. And it allows us to have a special expanded edition, 1.5 times the Daf Yomi, because of my traveling, Mr. Shem, to a wedding.
Have a big trip. Yeah.
I hope so, Mr. Shem. The weather should be nice, but we are at my Rabbi Shimon. So where the skinny lines are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from where the lines get fat. The skinny lines, my Rabbi Shimon. Where is Rabbi Shimon? Now, we had mentioned in Rabbi Shimon having this discussion as to which of the types of the death sentences are more severe than the others. We mentioned, incidentally, that Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that when a woman who is a arusa commits adultery, so he holds that her punishment is going to be sreifa, escalated from regular skila. And so just like a nesua, her punishment is escalated from chenek, strangulation, to, am I okay with non-translating? Just to be able to keep me moving.
Yeah.
And we've translated those enough times, so hopefully we've got them by now, sreifa, right? So we're escalating from chenek to sreifa. By a nesua, by an arusa, we've escalated from sreifa, from skila to sreifa, because he holds that's an escalation. The Rabbanan disagreed with him, and they hold that skila is the most severe. Therefore, there is no escalation from skila to sreifa. They disagree, and they hold that an arusa does not get a change in punishment. Only the nesua gets a change in punishment. So now let's talk about that statement of Rabbi Shimon. My Rabbi Shimon, where is the statement of Rabbi Shimon that he holds that this is the distinction, that he disagrees with the Rabbanan on this point about what punishment an arusa gets when she commits adultery? The Tanya we're going to Rabbi Shimon says, Shnei klolos nemru bebas kohen. So we have two rules which were written by a daughter of a kohen, bebas kohen v'lo bas Yisrael. When the Torah talks about two types of women who commit adultery, it doesn't specify any type of woman. It doesn't mention bas kohen. So the Gemara wants to know, what are you talking about, a bas kohen, the daughter of a kohen? It's not bas kohen. It's any woman. So we mean is ema af bas kohen. What he means to say is that since there's no specific type of woman mentioned, it includes every type of married woman, whether she's a bas kohen or not. So even a bas kohen is already included. The hotzia kosev nesua miklal nesua. So therefore, then the Torah separately says that a bas kohen gets a different punishment, and she gets sreifa. So what it's doing is saying the punishment that a bas kohen would normally get as a nesua is not the punishment that she would get because she's a bas kohen. And similarly, va'arusa miklal arusa, also the punishment that an arusa bas kohen gets is not the same. Just like going from chenek to sreifa is a stringency for a nesua, af keshotzia kosev arusa miklal arusa lahachmir. So too, going from skila to sreifa for an arusa is also a stringency. And that's where he comes out with his conclusion that sreifa is stronger than skila. Okay, now, zomame nesua bas kohen. So the Edom Zomamim who testify against a woman who is a bas kohen. So bichlal zomame nesua bas Yisrael. So they are in the same category. They get the same punishment as Edom Zomamim who testify against a non-kohen woman who commits adultery. The zomei arusa bas kohen bichlal zomei arusa bas Yisrael, and also the zomamim of an arusa get the same punishment as the zomamim of a regular Jewish girl. In other words, zomamim, we're going to learn later on as we turn the page, that zomamim, based on a pasuk, get the punishment that is normal and typical, not the specialized bas kohen punishment. And we're going to learn why that is. But he mentions, just as, should be aware, as far as escalating punishments go, for the woman herself, not for the Edom Zomamim. Okay. Now, Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa. The brisa is going to say some things which are difficult to understand, but the Gemara is going to spend the next page going through each of these statements line by line and explaining what they mean. So we shouldn't fret. Tana Rabbanan. Ubas ish kohen, a daughter of a man who's a kohen. Ki tachel, when she begins, that's what means tachel, means to begin, when she begins to go off the derech and commit adultery. So yachol afilu chalola es Shabbos. Now, she gets her punishment escalated. We might think that just as we're escalating the punishment with regards to adultery, so we're also going to escalate her punishment with regards to other punishments that she would get skila for, like violating Shabbos. Why would we think that? Great question, but we'll hang on till we explain the brisa. But the brisa is saying, well, if she gets an escalated punishment with regards to being an adulteress, let's escalate her punishment with regards to violating Shabbos. Tamad Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, liznus. The escalation of punishment only applies to adultery, liznus. Bechilulin shebiznus akasa medaber. The pasuk is only telling me that there's an escalation when she gets involved with violations that relate to promiscuity, right? Yachol afilu pnuya. Now, maybe that would include even an unmarried woman. Now, that all depends on what the definition of znus is, right? Znus, we could translate as promiscuity, but we've been presuming that it means adultery. So if she's not married, I might think she also gets sreifa. We'll explain that in the Gemara later on as well. Nemar kan aviha v'nemar leholan aviha. So therefore, the Torah explains that the Bas Kohen, she is mechaleles es aviha. She violates her father, and also in the other case by a regular woman, right? It also says that she is aviha. Also talks about aviha. The pasuk is votzias hanara el pesach by the nara morasa beis aviha uskaluha, by the regular circumstance where nara morasa commits adultery. Also, she violates her father's house. So malaholon znus im zikas habal, just like when it comes to the nara morasa, there's a husband there and a father involved because she's a nara morasa. Afkan znus im zikas habal. So too, the Bas Kohen only gets the punishment of sreifa when it involves a violation of marriage and her father's household. O eno omer aviha el hotzias kol adam. Well, maybe if you read the pasuk, it says that she commits adultery in her father's house. Maybe it literally means she commits adultery with her father. So if the person she commits adultery is with her father, then she gets the punishment of sreifa. Maybe that's what the pasuk is telling us. Kesha omer hi mechaleles, when the pasuk says she profanes. Havi kol adam. That means that she only profanes her father's house, but she's committing adultery with any other person. And we're going to explain all of that again. The Gemara is going to explain each line. Emor ma'ani mekayim aviha. So then what am I going to be using by talking about the father? What difference does that make? We know there's a husband. What is the father relevant to the case then if it's really adultery with any person? So nemar kan aviha v'nemar laholan aviha. We're going to compare also again the case of the Bas Kohen to the case of the Nara Ha'orasa. Malahalon znus im zikas habal. This has to be an adulterous relationship together with cheating on a husband. So too, afkan znus im zikas habal. That is the case with the woman who is a Bas Kohen. There has to be a promiscuous relationship of cheating on a husband. Ima laholan na'ara v'hi arusa. Afkan na'ara v'hi arusa. So then, okay, well then if that's the circumstance, the daughter who is getting the death penalty is getting it because she's a Nara Ha'orasa. So let's say she's not a Nara Ha'orasa, right? Again, the father wasn't irrelevant to be able to say like a Nara Ha'orasa, the father's involved, because Rabbi Rishmal, remember, agrees that such a punishment applies even when she's a Nesua. Even the Rabbanan hold that that's the punishment she gets when she's a Nesua, when she's fully married. The father's not relevant once she's a full Nesua. So then why is it, so maybe would say that this punishment goes when she's an Arusa Nara, Vihi Nesua Bogeres, Vihi Arusa Bogeres. What if she's not a Nara Ha'orasa? Let's say she's a Nara who is Nesua, or she's a Bogeres. She's an Arusa that's Bogeres. Bogeres is the next phase physically, right? A Nara is when she's 12 to 12 and a half. Once she's physically mature, and Bogeres, she makes her own life decisions at that point. So the father's not relevant and not involved, right?
You mean at 16 or over, basically?
No, 12 and a half and over. Vehi Nesua, right? So now she's Nesua. Afilu Hezkena. Minayin, Talmud Lomar. So where do we say this from? Ubas Kohen, she's the daughter of a Kohen, Mikol Makom. Any circumstance of a Bas Kohen gets this punishment. So Bas Kohen on to Nun Aleph Amid Aleph. Bas Kohen, Ainli Ella, Shenises LeKohen. So now she's the daughter of a Kohen. That must mean that it applies only if she marries a Kohen. Why is that? And the Gemara is going to ask again. The Bas Kohen could marry anybody. Nises Levate, so she could marry a Bas Kohen. She's still the daughter of a Kohen if she marries somebody else. But we're going to point out, not necessarily so, because once she is a Bas Kohen who marries somebody who's not a Kohen, she loses her Bas Kohen privileges, right, as we're going to discuss. Nises Levi Yisrael Le'ove Kochavim. What if she marries a Levi or a Yisrael or a non-Jew? Stop there for a moment. The non-Jew is a big questionable one, because all of these other circumstances, as we're going to mention, she can be married to a Levi. She can be married to Yisrael. A non-Jew, the Kedushin doesn't matter. This is not a ger. This is a non-Jew. A non-Jew, the Kedushin does not work. It's not effective. So some remove this from the girsa. But in any event, Lovi Kochavim is a difficult phrase to be able to understand, right? In other words, if she cheats on a husband that is not a Kohen, lecholol, a cholol is somebody that is somebody who is a product of a Kohen who married somebody he wasn't allowed to marry. Lemamzer ulenosin, a mamzer, and again, she's not allowed to marry a mamzer, or a nosin, who are these converts who sort of tricked their way into converting in the Navi in Yoshua. They pretended that they were from a faraway land, and Yoshua agrees to leave these Messinim alone and makes them the laborers, but he agrees not to destroy them, although he's going to destroy everybody else in the land. So in these circumstances, when you have somebody that you're not allowed to marry, but there's a lo saseh, right? The lo saseh, you're not allowed to marry a mamzer. If you do anyway, the Kiddushin works. The Kiddushin's effective. So therefore, if she commits adultery from that relationship, it is adultery. So there's a difference between a Kiddushin that doesn't work at all and a Kiddushin that does work. It's just an Aveira.
But there are conditions where she can return to her father's house. She has no children.
Correct. If the marriage ends without children and those. So minayin. So how do I know that she's still in this category of a Bas Kohen, even though she married outside of the Kahuna? Talmud Ubas Ish Kohen. She's the daughter of a man who is a Kohen, meaning her father's the relevant character here, not who she marries. Alpha Pisha ain't a Kohenes, even though she may not be a Kohenes anymore, because she marries outside of the Kohanim. Nevertheless, since her father is a Kohen, she is involved in this extra level of punishment. He besreifa, she gets the punishment of sreifa. Ve'ein bo Allah besreifa, but the person that she commits adultery with does not get sreifa. It's only the punishment for her. Sorry?
Why she getting straight?
Great question.
The other person doesn't get straight from. You could be also cheating.
Great question, but hang on to it, because the Gemara is going to go through each line of this brisa and give an explanation for each one. He besreifa, she gets sreifa. Ve'ein zom meha besreifa. As Rabbi Yishmael said before, but the ones who are Edom Zomim against her also do not get sreifa. Rabbi Eliezer says, Es aviha b'sreifa, ves chameha b'skila. Her father gets with sreifa, and her father-in-law gets skila. What does that mean? Great question. Gemara is going to discuss that line for an extended period of time, or extended several lines. Discuss what that means. We'll have four potential explanations for that line, because that's a tricky line. Okay. Now, let's go through each one. Amar Yachol afilu chilul Shabbos. So the Brisa said, we might escalate her punishment to Sreifa from Skila if she's Mechaleles Shabbos. She violates Shabbos. Chilul Shabbos, bas Skila he. Well, wait a second. If she's Mechalel Shabbos, so then she gets Skila. So Amar Rava, Hamani, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Shimon he, to Amar Sreifa Chamura. So this must be Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because if she's already getting Sreifa, the Gemara is asking, if she's already getting skila, what escalation could there be? Right? That's already the highest one for violating Shabbos. The answer is we must be talking about Rabbi Shimon's opinion, who holds that sreifa is higher. And therefore, this mission is going according to Rabbi Shimon's view that sreifa is the highest, so we might have thought that we might escalate her from skila up one notch to sreifa. Salka daita chamina. I might have thought, Ho'ol ve'itmar behu rachmana bekahani, that we understand by the Kohanim, derabu baho mitzvos yaseros. Kohanim have extra mitzvos, right? The Kohanim are a higher spiritual level. Tidon bisreifa. Therefore, since the Kohanim have higher standards, she should get the higher punishment of sreifa if she commits a violation of Shabbos. Kamash malon. So therefore, this Bryce is coming to tell me not so. This rule only applies to adultery. So maishna minei. So D-Day. So what is the difference Why would we presume the daughter should get a higher punishment for skila than the Kohen himself? We never suggested in the Mishnah, in the Brisa, that the Kohen who violates Shabbos gets sreifa. Only the daughter of a Kohen who violates Shabbos gets sreifa. Why? Why not the Kohen himself? So the answer is, I would have thought to have said, Ihu de ishtarya le Shabbos legabe avoda. So he came into lo ishtarya Shabbos legaba. Ematido b'sreifa. I might have thought there's a difference. A Kohen, he is told that he can serve in the Beis Hamikdash and violate Shabbos in order to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. The daughter of a Kohen has no such permission. So therefore, to say Shabbos is escalated by a Kohen is not really true, because we see that even Shabbos might even be less for a Kohen. So, however, but the daughter of a Kohen, no, there's no distinction, and therefore maybe she would get her punishment escalated. Kamash Malon, we're going to say no. She gets the regular skila punishment for violating Shabbos. Okay, next. Yachol afila pnuya, you might have thought maybe even an unmarried woman. So, haliznus ksiv. So he says, but the pasuk says that she is going liznus. We have to presume liznus means a adulterous relationship. So the answer is Rabbi Lezer. De Amar panoi habal pnuya shelo l'shem ishus asa zona. Rabbi Lezer is of the opinion that two unmarried people, right, who have relations, that is considered znus. What practical difference does it make? That a Kohen is not allowed to marry a zona.
Znus means what?
Znus means promiscuity or illegal relationship. So we had thought an illegal relationship literally means an adulterous relationship, not according to Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer says that it means any type of relationship outside of marriage. Yeah.
I was going to say, but one way of requiring a wife is via. So is that really?
It says shelo l'shem ishus. Right? That's what's very important to it. Right? If he said two unmarried people get together and say we're getting married with this bia, then they'd be married, right? But if they say we are having intent not to be married, so then she becomes a zona. That is not a universal opinion. That's his own opinion, right? O eina omer aviha el hotzi es kol adam. Maybe we said the Brisa says maybe we're just bringing in the father in order to exclude any other person, meaning that she's going to get the punishment for sreifa for having relations with her father. Maybe that's what the pasuk is saying. Ela ma'inihu shezinsa me'avia. So how are we explaining this? She had relations with her father. So my irya bas Kohen. Well, if that's the case, why are we specifically talking about the daughter of a Kohen?
If she's having relationships with her father, is his wife allowed to give a get? Is that circumstance?
Is whose wife? His the father?
Father's wife, yeah.
Is she allowed to give a get?
Yeah,
The father's wife. Women never give gets, right? They are always on the receiving end of gets. Is she able to sue and say, "I would like a get"? She could certainly ask for one, right? A husband cheating on a wife is not automatic grounds for the separation. Remember that a husband can be married to two wives. It's a wife that if she commits adultery, then she becomes usher on her husband, right? And then you have kiddushin shalom labia, and then you have potential forced getting in those circumstances. Okay, but now, if this is the case, afilu bas Yisrael nami, a woman who is not a Kohen is also prohibited and gets sreifa for having relations with her father. It's the same punishment. Dama Rava, as Rava says, Amar li Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avudimi, Asya heina heina, Asya zima zima. We have Gzera Shava heina heina, and we have Gzera Shava zima zima. Right, Gzera Shava of the case of Bas Bincha, the daughter of your son, and then we have also which we have a Gzera Shava to Heina, which also talks about your daughter, to tell me that it's usher for a person to have a relation with his daughter. And then we have a Gzera Shava of the word Zima over to a circumstance of a woman and her mother, where the punishment is sreifa for such an avera, to tell me that one who has relations with his daughter, between these two Gzera Shavas, comes out, the one who has relations with his daughter gets sreifa. So therefore, it's the same punishment. So it's tzarich. No, I need it because Salka Daita Chamina, I would have thought to have said Krol Afuki Mi de Rava, that the pasuk is coming to exclude what Rava is saying. Meaning, if the pasuk was coming specifically to tell me that the Bas Kohen, only a Bas Kohen gets sreifa for having relations with her father, then the Gzera Shava could not be telling me that was the punishment by everybody else. Mi de Goli Rachman of Bas Kohen velo b'Bas Yisrael Kamash Malan. So therefore, this is coming to tell me that no, that's not pshat in the pasuk. The pasuk is not telling me that only the Bas Kohen who has relations with their father gets sreifa. Rather, every woman who's a Bas Kohen who has znus gets sreifa, and therefore Rava's drasha is correct, and every person who has relations with his daughter gets sreifa. Okay, Bas Kohen. Now we have the next case. Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen. Ainli ela shenises leKohen. Bas Kohen, that means, Brisa said, we only are going to presume that it means somebody who's married to a Kohen. Nises Levi, Yisrael, Love Kochovim. What about all these other circumstances where she's married to a Levi, Yisrael, a non-Jew, a Chalal, a Nosin, a Mamzer Minayin? Tamad Lomar Bas Ish Kohen, the daughter of a man who is a Kohen. Extra word Ish, to tell me as long as the father is a Kohen. Now, Afal Pi, She'eno Kohenes, even though she's not a Kohenes. Now, Mishum, the Insiba, Lehu Lehani, Lav Bas Koheni, says the Gemara, our question. What do you mean? Just because she marries somebody who's not a Kohen, she becomes not the daughter of a Kohen? She's still the daughter of a Kohen, no matter who she marries. But two, Midi Kohenes LeKohen Ksiv. It doesn't say anything about her being a Kohenes, it just doesn't say whether she's a Kohenes. I get it, she's not a Kohenes anymore. Great, she's not a Kohenes, but she's still the daughter of a Kohen. So therefore, what's the relevance? It really sounds like the 2 points are the same question. But Salkodaita Chamina, I would have thought to have said, Ki tachel liznus amar Rachmana. Hani midli hecha de kamitachla hashta. It says that when she begins to commit some kind of an adulterous relationship or a promiscuous crime. So when she begins to commit that, that's when she gets sreifa. However, hashta in these circumstances, mitachla hashta, to come mitachla hashta. She's starting now. Her first crime is this adulterous relationship. Aval. However, kaven to come mitachla v'kaima mikara, since she married, for example, a mamzer or somebody else who she's not allowed to marry, so then that's already she's already outside. She's already gone outside of regular marriage circumstances. That means that she wouldn't be eligible for the punishment of the punishment that applies to a circumstance of kitachel znus when she's starting znus, because she's not starting znus already. She already was doing things that she's already married to the wrong people. Damar Mar, as Mar said, Bas Kohen kisiel ish, a daughter of a Kohen, when she becomes married to a man who's a zar, who's a non-Kohen. Kevan sheniv Allah, once she becomes married, lifsola psulet pasla. So then once she has relations with her, she becomes invalidated from the Kohen, the Kohen privileges, right? She can't eat truma anymore. So she's invalidated. L'Levi v'Yisrael nami. So too, when it comes to Yisrael and a Levi also. V'shava el beis aviha kinuhu reha. But we say that since she can return, and this is what you said, since she can go back to her father's household like her youth if she gets divorced or her husband dies, when she's with him, then she can't eat the truma. But she's not completely invalidated and becomes outside of being a daughter of a Kohen. Ema lo tidun b'sreifa, so I might have thought that she doesn't get judged with sreifa because she's already outside of the kahuna parameters. Kamash malon. So this comes to tell us, no, not true. She's still under the under consideration of being the daughter of a Kohen, despite the fact that while she stays married to this person who's a non-Kohen, she's outside of the Kohen boundaries. Udelo Rabbi Meir, and our Mishnah is not following Rabbi Meir's opinion. Tanya learned Brisa. Bas Kohen shenises li Yisrael. Let's say you have a daughter of a Kohen. She marries a regular Jew. The achla truma. Now she goes and does the wrong thing. She eats truma, even though she's not supposed to. Mishalemes es hakeren. She has to repay the truma that she ate because it was stealing. It's not allowed. The eina mishalemes es hachomesh, but she doesn't have to pay the punitive 1/5. A non-Kohen who eats truma not only has to repay the truma that he ate, but he also has to add a 1/5 penalty for eating that truma. However, the daughter of the Kohen, since in some regards she's still connected to this being a Kohen business, she only has to repay it, but she doesn't have to pay the penalty of 1/5.
But isn't her punishment larger because she's still a Bas Kohen and she wasn't?
No, because she's a Bas Kohen, therefore punishment is smaller because what she did isn't as bad. Right?
She grew up in a house eating truma. Now she leaves the house and she goes and eats truma. She's like, oh, wait a minute, I just like to taste it. I forgot there's my place anymore.
Right.
It's not punitive. It's not like she went out of her way to do intentionally the damage.
Umisa saw bisreifa. And since she's still connected to the kahuna in some way, her death, if she commits adultery, is with sreifa. Nises le'echad min hapsulin, if she marries somebody who's actually a possible person for her to marry, mishalemes keren v'chomesh, like a mamzer. So now she's completely ruined from being a kohen. She can never go back, and therefore now she has to pay keren v'chomesh. She has to pay both the keren and the fifth penalty, and umisasa bechenek, and she's only going to get the regular chenek penalty because she's not even in the category of being a daughter of a kohen. Different Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Not like our brisa.
Will one say that her going off to be married in a situation with a non-Jew, somebody who follows the stars and mamzer, isn't our Nari's at that point going to that?
Maybe that's the drush. In other words, right.
So she should already be.
That is in itself. That is not adultery, right?
It's not adultery, but it is.
But the punishment for sreifa is adultery, right? The sreifa is for adultery. The punishment of marrying a mamzer is not sreifa. It's a lo saseh. It's skila. It's a malchus, right? It's a lo saseh. Okay, now the chachamim disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they say v'zu mishal mos keren v'lo chomesh, that despite the fact that she marries somebody who she's not supposed to marry, her punishment remains. So she still only pays the keren for the truma, the actual amount, not the penalty of the fifth. Umisa son b'sreifa, and her death, and the punishment for her death penalty is sreifa because she considered a bas kohen anyway. Okay, now Rabbi Eliezer Omer es avia b'sreifa. Now we continue. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. This last line in the Mishnah, a very difficult line, right? Her father with sreifa, that's chameha b'skila, and her father-in-law is with skila. Now, my es aviha of es chameha. What are we talking about when we're talking about the father and the father-in-law? Are we talking about, there's two possibilities really. We're talking about actually having relations with the father and the father-in-law, or we could be talking about she's under the jurisdiction of the father, meaning she's not married yet, she's a nara ha'me'orasa, or under the jurisdiction of the father-in-law, meaning she's married and living in the husband's house under the jurisdiction of the father-in-law. That's two different ways of looking at it. Ilema es aviha me'aviha. If we're going to look at this and say that from her father means, literally, she had relations with her father. Veschameha mechameha, and we're talking about the father-in-law means actually having relations with her father-in-law. Ma'ir bas kohen. So why are you talking about a bas kohen getting sreifa? As afil bas Yisrael nami, as we said, even the daughter of a regular Jewish person who has relations with her father gets sreifa. Bito b'sreifa, v'kalaso b'skila. And if somebody has relations with his daughter-in-law, so punishment is skila. So not what our brisa said. Our brisa said. Right, so it would be the same thing. It wouldn't make any difference if she's a bas kohen, right? So if that's just the circumstance, then it doesn't make a difference if she's a bas kohen. That should be anybody. Ella, so rather, es aviha birishus aviha. So rather, what we mean is when she's having her znus, when she's having her illicit affair, it's not with the father; it's in the father's jurisdiction. Meaning when she's a me'orasa, veschameha. And when it means that she's under the father-in-law's jurisdiction, birshus chameha, it means when she's a nesua, married and under her father-in-law's jurisdiction. So keman, so then who does this come out like? So it doesn't hold like anybody. Because, ikirabanan, if this is going to hold like Rabbanan, remember what Rabbi Eliezer said. Rabbi Eliezer says, under such a circumstance, in the father's household, the me'orasa is going to get sreifa. That's not so bad. That at least holds like Rabbi Yishmael, but not like the Rabbanan. And then as she's a nesua, she's going to get skila. That holds like nobody. Because the Rabbanan say, both the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yishmael say that she's supposed to get sreifa in that circumstance. So what is skila? So, come on. Ika Rabbanan, if you're going to say it's the Rabbanan, Ha'amri nesua yotzeis l'sreifa velo arusa, they say that only the married woman gets sreifa, not an arusa. So that first part of the Mishnah is wrong. So, Ika Rabbi Shimon, and if it's Rabbi Shimon, okay, they may have gotten the first part right, that bebeis aviha, the arusa part that she gets sreifa, hamar achas arusa v'achas nesua b'sreifa, he holds that both the arusa and the nesua get sreifa. So that means that when it says bebeis chameha, that she gets skila, that's not true because she's supposed to get sreifa, not skila. Now we're going to have a third opinion that we've never seen before. So we're going to actually see the whole brisa of Rabbi Yishmael later on to understand him. But let's throw him into the mix now. Ha'amar arusa yotzeis l'sreifa. He holds that an arusa gets sreifa and nesua gets chenek. He's the third opinion here that we have never seen before, right? Why? It's a good question. If you're wondering why, I'm going to tell you, don't worry about why. We will get to why later, right? But at least we know that his opinion doesn't work either, because the base aviha, right? The base avia, we said is sreifa. Fine, that'll agree with him. But as far as skila by base chameha, that isn't going to work because he holds that you're supposed to get chenek.
It sounds almost like Chanita is almost according to his opinion that it's worse than.
It's not. You know that where we're coming from is that he holds the pasuk that says that a bas kohen gets sreifa only applies to the arusa case. It doesn't apply to the nesua case. Therefore, the nesua stays in the general category of a regular married woman. That's you know that we must be headed there with the drasha. Why he holds that way and how he understands psukim, we'll see. Now. So therefore, right, as chameha bechenekhu, right, he says you're supposed to get strangulation. Okay, so we don't have a good answer there. Shalach Rabin mishmeid Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina. So Rabin said in the name of Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina the following answer: Kachi hatzah shel Mishnah. This is the right. The Mishnah's text is correct. Mishnah's text. We don't have to change the text because you have a difficult line here. So maybe the first question is maybe brisa. Maybe the brisa is wrong. He said no, brisa is fine. Right? Liolam kirabanan. And I'm going to explain the line according to the Rabbanan Shita. Again, the Rabbanan Shita that Arusa is supposed to get skila and the Nesua is supposed to get sreifa. And this Mishnah looks backwards. The simple answer would be flip it, right? That would be a good answer. But he says, no, don't flip the text. That's how he starts it. Don't flip the text. Vahachi kamar. This is how you're going to explain the Mishnah. Kol shehu lemata mimisa saviha. If any circumstance happens where the relationship that she has a punishment which is less than the punishment that one would get for committing adultery with your father, meaning umaynihu, right? So what circumstance is that? Nesua bas Yisrael. That would be the daughter of a woman who's a regular Yisrael, right? So the punishment, the line is like this. Somebody who has a relationship with his daughter is supposed to get sreifa. So any circumstance where the misa, he says this is the rule, any circumstance where the misa that would happen under the normal marriage circumstance would be less than sreifa, for example, a nesua who's supposed to get chenek, so deila nesua bas yisrael bechenek, so hacha b'misa savia bis sreifa. So the misa savia is supposed to be sreifa, so therefore we're going to promote the nesua, the bas kohen who's a nesua, we're going to bump her up to sreifa. Right? That's what we're going to do. However, kol shi lamala minisa saviha, anytime the punishment is already more severe than sreifa, which is the punishment that you would get for having relations with your daughter, such as umaynihu, what is that case? That's the arusa bas Yisrael. The arusa bas Yisrael, dila arusa bas Yisrael biyalma beskila. She normally gets skila, so it's already at the highest misa level. So hacha here, where it's a bas kohen, the misas chameha beskila, when it's in her, she's going to get this punishment of skila, right? Which is the death sentence that would normally go to somebody who has relations with their father-in-law. Okay, so therefore, this is what he's basically saying is the Mishnah is saying you draw a line. If the death sentence that is normally given to a non-Kohen is below the line of the punishment that she would get if she had relations with her father, then bump it up to sreifa. If the punishment is more severe, i.e. the punishment that she would get when having relations with her father-in-law, then you leave that punishment alone, she gets skila. That's what happens to the bas kohen. Okay, that's interesting reading of the line, right? But the advantage is you don't have to flip the text, and it goes according to the Rabbanan. So it's nice. Maskif lo Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, here's what I don't like about your interpretation. Midi lamala lamatiktani. The whole thing isn't written, right? The whole thing that you just said, basically, about there's a line, and if the misa's below the line, then you bump it up to the line. If it's above the line, right? That's not there. That's all your invention in the interpretation of the Mishnah. That's why I don't like your answer, right? It's not factually incorrect. It's just that you have to do a lot of jumping through hoops and adding words into the text in order to get there. Okay? Ella, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. So rather, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Liolam on nun aleph amad base. Liolam k'Rabbi Yishmael. So rather, I'm going to tell you that this Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael's opinion, everybody's getting sreifa, right? Right? Arusa, Bas Nesua, that she's getting sreifa. V'hachi kamar. This is how we're going to explain the Mishnah. Es aviha birshus aviha. When she has relations as a nara ma'orasa, in the domain of her father, bisreifa, she's going to get sreifa. Ves chameha, but if she has relations in her when it says es chameha, that actually means me chameha. If she's a nesua and she has relations with her father-in-law, the skila, so therefore normally she would get skila, the chol adam bechenek, but a regular non-Kohen woman is going to get skila, not chenek. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Now, Amar Rava says, my shna o edi ve'edi mamish, o edi ve'edi rishus. I'll tell you what I don't like about your answer. You flip in the middle. Either you're talking about from your father means in the rishus of your father, and then mechameha, your father-in-law, means in the rishus of your father-in-law, or take it literally and say he's having a relationship with the father and the father-in-law. You're flipping it back and forth. You're first saying that from the first statement in the father's household, talks about in your father's household, and then the second part where it says mechamel from the father-in-law, it means literally the father-in-law. So you're flipping in the middle. I don't like that answer. Ella Amar Rava. So Rava says, I'll try again. He says, Liolam, Rabbi Shimon. I'm going to try it according to Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Sorry, I said Rabbi Yishmael. I had it backward. Rabbi Yishmael was the opinion that says that you're supposed to get chenek, right? That the bas Kohen gets chenek. That's what it's supposed to be. The bas Kohen gets chenek, and the bas Kohen gets sreifa. So I said it wrong. What it means is that the bas Kohen, who normally gets chenek, if she has relations with her father-in-law, despite the fact that she's normally going to get chenek like everybody else, gets it bumped up to skila because it's having relations with the father-in-law. Okay, that's how he explains it. Now we're going to go to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is the one who says, and that's why I had mixed up. Rabbi Shimon's the one who said that everybody gets sreifa, right? Rabbi Shmuel is the one who says sreifa and chenek, sreifa for arusa and chenek for nesua. But Rabbi Shimon is the one who says that everybody gets sreifa. The kasava Rabbi Eliezer nesua ka'arusa. Rabbi Eliezer is holding that a married woman and arusa are the same thing. Ma arusa chad darga maskinon la miskila l'sreifa. Rabbi Eliezer is going on like this. He says that everybody just basically bumps up one level. That's how this works. I hold like Rabbi Shimon that you've got to bump up, that the psukim apply to a nesua and an arusa. Just like from an arusa, we're going to go from skila to sreifa, which according to Rabbi Shimon is a bump up, right? We're going from skila to sreifa. So af nesua, also a married woman, chad darga. We're going to go up one level. We're going to go up one level, which is from chenek to skila. And so therefore, that's how we get an arusa gets sreifa and a nesua gets skila. Maskinon la mechanek l'skila. We're going to go up one level. So maskif la Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina doesn't like that answer. He says ha'idi v'idi Rabbi Shimon b'sreifa kamar. But we know that when we actually read the brisa about what Rabbi Shimon holds, he clearly stated that both the nesua and the arusa are supposed to get sreifa. He doesn't hold what you just said. You don't get bumped up one level from chenek to skila. He says that everybody gets sreifa, because that's what the pasuk says, that she goes to sreifa. So that's not a good answer. Ella Amar Ravina. So Ravina says, L'yolam k'Rabbanan. I'll go back and I'll explain the Mishnah according to the Rabbanan. Ve'epoch. And now I got to flip the text. Okay, we're going to go to the flip the text. Okay? Esaviha beskila. If she's in her father's household, that's when she's in arusa, then her punishment at a bas Kohen gets skila. Veschameha. And when she's in her father-in-law's household, when she's married in nesua, she gets sreifa, and that works. Okay, the only problem with that answer is you got to flip the text, right? We might not love that. Now, v'haide kamar esaviha sircha bi almanakat. Now, that which it says es aviha, right? It's not literally doesn't literally mean that in es aviha, right? It means that since we're using the same language of the previous part of the Mishnah, where we basically said, it's not literally her father's. It just means that we're using the same language in her when she's in arusa in her father's household. That's what we're saying. Okay, so right, that's why it doesn't use the words arusa and nesua, which would be the simpler language. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. So Rav Nachman says the name of Rabba bar Avua, Amar Rav, halacha kedeshalich rabin mishmeid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. The halacha follows out of the four explanations we just gave, the first one. The first one we gave, which was Rabin, the name of Rabbi Yossi, where we didn't have to flip the text, but we had that line where we said if anybody whose misa is less than this, we bump it up. If anybody's higher than this, we bump it down. Okay, that's the one we like. Amar of Yosef. So Rav Yosef has a problem with that. Hilchasa lemashicha. What kind of use? This is a halacha which isn't important until Mashiach comes. Meaning, we don't give death penalties nowadays. So you're telling me the halacha is like one way or the other way? Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, that's what bothers you. Elamayata shchitas kodshim lo lisni. We're going to spend a whole year and a half learning Maseches Kodshim. We're going to Masechtos in Seder Kodshim. We're going to learn about all the korbanos and everything.
That's going to be a year and a half.
It's going to take us a year and a half. It's going to take us a year, right? It's going to take a while to do Masechtos, all the korbanos and all that stuff. We're going to say it's all irrelevant. Just skip it because it doesn't matter because we're not doing it anyway, right? So we'll just say we don't have to worry about the Mashiach comes. Nobody's going to learn it. Ella drosh v'kabel schar. It means you're supposed to learn it, get benefit, even though get the merit for doing it. It doesn't matter whether you're actually doing it or not. Sachanami here too, drosh v'kabel schar. Right, learn it and get a benefit, get the reward for it. So hachi kamri. No, this is what it means. Hilchasa lomali sugya dishmasa halacha kamri. He says the point that we're making is your halacha is that we are interpreting the Mishnah in a certain way. We already know what the Rabbanan's opinion is. We already know what Rabbi Yishmael's opinion is. We already know what Rabbi Shimon's opinion is. We're just trying to understand the Mishnah according to one of the viewpoints. It's irrelevant. When Mashiach comes and Rabbi Elazar comes back to life, we'll ask him what he meant. Right? As far as the halacha lamaisa, the practical halacha is concerned, it's irrelevant because we already know what each of the shitas means. We're just trying to twist the brisa to fit into one of the shitas. Which one of these twisty versions doesn't really matter. That's his point. Okay, so my Rabbi Yishmael. So now we're going to we brought Rabbi Yishmael into this, right? Rabbi Yishmael was a new opinion, and he held that a daughter of a Kohen gets sreifa when she is a nara ma'orasa, but gets chenek, regular chenek, strangulation when she is a nisua. So Tanya, we learn a brayso. Bas ish kohen ki tachel is nus benara. Pasuk again. This is the daughter of a man who's a kohen. When she goes astray, when she commits an adulterous relationship, benara v'hi arusa. This is talking about when she is a nara and she's an arusa. Hakas medaber. That's all that it's talking about. Therefore, that's why she's the only nara ma'orasa is the one that gets the sreifa. That's talking about this pasuk. At omer benara v'hi arusa. You tell me that that's what the pasuk is talking about. It's a nara and a arusa. Oh wait, no, lafil and asua. Maybe the pasuk means even an asua, like Rabbi Shimon says. Talmud lomar ish asher yin of es eishes re'ehu mos yumas. The pasuk says a man who has an adulterous relationship with the wife of his friend, so he shall surely die. Hanoef v'hanoefes, the adulterer and the adulteress. Hakol hayu bichlal hanoef v'hanoefes. Every single person is considered to be a person who's a noef or a noefes, an adulterer or an adulteress. Hotzi akasav bas Yisrael b'skila. The Torah tells us that a Jewish woman gets skila ubas kohen b'sreifa, and the daughter of a kohen gets sreifa. Under other circumstances, right? On a regular circumstance, this is the standard punishment, they die. And we're going to learn that the standard punishment, standard death is chenek. Right? So they're going to get a regular noef and a noefes, includes everybody, and they get chenek. Then the pasuk comes and tells me a regular a Jewish lady who commits adultery as a nara ha'orasa gets skila. And then we find the daughter of a kohen gets sreifa. What circumstance? Just like when the pasuk is telling us that the punishment is different for a regular Jewish woman, it's talking about when she's a nara ha'orasa, she gets skila. Bas kohen lisreifa. So too, when the pasuk is taking a bas kohen out and saying that she gets sreifa, arusa v'lo nesua, it's talking when she's an arusa and not when she's married. Next, we say zomameha uboaleha bichlal v'asisim lo kasher zomam. Now, the next thing we said in this brisa was that the witnesses who are zomamim, right, and the one who does the adultery with the bas kohen, they get the regular punishment. They do not get escalated to sreifa. Well, why not? It says they're included in vasisim lo kasher zomam. Well, 1 second. Bo lamai kasher zomam. Why did you just throw this in? You said the zomamim and the person that she has relations with is in the category of that you have to punish him with the same punishment that they schemed. the person who had a relationship with her was no scheming. He actually did something. Ella, so we got to change that text. Zomameh b'chal misas bo'ala. We're saying that the ones who schemed have a punishment. They schemed against two people. They schemed against the woman who commits adultery and against the man who commits adultery. We're going to say that the schemers get the punishment of the man who commits adultery. Mishum shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Va'asisem lo kasher zamam la'asos la'achiv." We do to the schemers like they wanted to do to their brother. V'lo la'achoso, not to their sister. Now, that doesn't mean that if somebody tries to become Edom Zomim for a woman, that they don't get punished. It just means that if there's a circumstance where they are scheming against both a man and a woman for the same crime, the punishment that they're going to receive is going to be the one that the man would receive, not the one the woman would receive. And since the man in this case gets the regular chenek, the woman would get sreifa, so we're going to give them chenek. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Akiva says, achas arusa v'achas nesua yotzeis l'sreifa. It does not matter whether it's an arusa or a nesua. There we're gonna. She goes out to sreifa. Yochel afila penuya. We might think even an unmarried woman also would go out and get sreifa. Like Rabbi, this is like he's saying like Rabbi Yishmael says that even an unmarried woman would also get that same punishment. It says aviha v'nemar la'alan aviha. We're going to take a comparison and say that when it comes to the bas kohen who gets sreifa, it says the word father, and also when it comes to an arusa, who is, it also uses the word father. Since that case, with the regular Bas Yisrael, is talking about a circumstance where she's attached to a husband. Therefore, it must be a Nara Ma'orasa, not an unmarried woman. Amar le Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, Ima lahola Nara v'hi arusa, Afkan Nara v'hi arusa. So you say, if that's the circumstance, so then... If that's the circumstance, so then it says in the pasuk that she has to be an arusa and a nara, right? So 1 second, let me see what that's saying. So okay, so he says, okay, so if that's the case, so if you're learning Gzera Shava, if what you're doing, he says to Rabbi Akiva, is what you're learning is Gzera Shava, and you're saying that the rule of a Bas Kohen applies to the circumstance of the same case of where it says the Aviha by a non-Kohen, that's a case of Nara Ma'orasa. So that means that only Sreifa should apply to Naram Orasa. That's what Rabbi Yishmael says, right? And he wants to say that there's chenek for the Nesua, right? He says that only, right? He says you only get chenek for the Nesua. This pasuk only applies to the Naram Orasa. It doesn't apply to the Nesua. So he says, I'll tell you, you're right. So Amar le Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva says, Yishmael Achim, my brother Yishmael, Bas u Bas ani doresh. She says, you're right, but I have another drasha. And that is the fact that it says bas and then an extra vav ubas to tell me that there are actually two circumstances to include also a regular nesua in the punishment that gets sreifa. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva says, I learn aviha to tell me that a narama orasa gets sreifa, and then the bas ubas, the extra vav, to tell me even a nesua gets sreifa as well. Rabbi Yishmael does not. So Marley. So he says, well, dorish bas ubas. Since you have this extra drosha of this extra vav, notzi zulis sreifa, you're going to take a married woman out to sreifa as the result of that. So 1 second, imash melahavias anasua hevias apnuya, the imash melahotzias apnuya hotzias anasua. So he says, what he's saying is like this: if you're going to tell me that ubas is coming to include other women in the case, so then you've got to include in other women in the case, you've got to take in the unmarried women as well, right? Bas ubas to include everybody. And so therefore everybody should get sreifa, even the unmarried bas kohen. So, and however, if you're going to tell me that there's a limiter on this, and you're going to learn bas ubas and not the aviyah, so then you should come out that the nesua does not get sreifa at all. Rabbi Akiva, he's Rabbi Akiva, that's how Rabbi Yishmael learns it, and he says, therefore, a Pnuya does not get, and a Nesua does not get. For Rabbi Akiva, a Hani Gzer Shava, Lemeute Pnuya. He says, Rabbi Akiva is learning like this, The vav comes to tell me that the sreifa applies to both an arusa and an asua, and then the gzera shava of avia comes to tell me specifically a married woman and not an unmarried woman. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva is going to say, I can learn bas ubas to include a married woman. Rabbi Yishmael says, I'm not going to learn bas ubas to include a married woman, because if I did that, then I'd include even unmarried women as well. I'm going to include the unmarried women as well. Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's why I have the gzera shava. Okay, now, v'hari bas ubas l'rabos esanesua. So bas ubas comes to include the married woman, and do we have a tissue here?
Yeah.
So bas ubas comes to include a nesua, and avia comes to limit a pnuya, a non-married woman. Okay, now. Rabbi Yishmael thought what Rabbi Akiva was saying is that midikamer le bas ubas, since he was telling him about his drosha, about ubas, bas ubas, that he was telling him that he was shmamina halder be migzera shava, that he had abandoned the gzera shava, that he wasn't holding. In other words, he thought you have to hold like one or the other, who you're including, who you're not including. Rabbi Akiva is saying, I've got two things. I've got the gzera shava plus I've got bas ubas. Rabbi Yishmael was saying, well, I thought that you meant that you were only doing the bas ubas, which means that bas ubas comes to include everybody, all the women, married, not married, and everybody. You've got no limiter. So that was why he asked the question. Now, Rabbi Yishmael doesn't have bas ubas. He has the gzera shava. He's learning just the avia, and that's why Rabbi Yishmael holds that the sreifa only applies to nara ma'orasa from the gzera shava. He doesn't learn bas ubas to apply it also to the nesua. So therefore, the question is, Hi bas ubas, my dorish bay. What does he do with the extra vav in bas ubas if he is not going to use it to teach me that the sreifa applies to a married woman as well? We need it according to what we were taught in the name of Shmuel's father, Bar Abin. Avui Shmuel Bar Abin. Lefisha matzinu shechola kakosa b'scharim bein tamimim lebali mumim. So, since we see by male kohanim that we find a distinction between male kohanim who have a blemish and male kohanim who do not have a blemish, as far as whether they can do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, right? So yachol nachlok bivno sehen. I might think that bas kohains also, right? We should make a distinction. If you're a daughter of a kohen and you have and your father has a blemish, I think it's if the father has a blemish, not if she has a blemish, because it goes right. If the father has a blemish and he's not able to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, therefore there's no then the sreifa penalty should apply to the daughter, right? Because it makes sense. So therefore, Tama Lomar bas ubas. Therefore, the Torah tells us no, the extra vav to tell me that despite the fact that you might have thought that, she's included anyway, even the daughter of a kohen who has a mum. Rabbi Akiva, how does he learn that? He learns it from Vehem Makrivim Vahayu Kodesh Menafka. He says, the pasuk says, they are the ones who bring the korban, and they shall be holy. Meaning, regardless of whether a kohen is able to bring a korban or not, he is still holy. And that is that a kohen who has a mum still has to stay away from misim. He still has other privileges that the kohen gets. A kohen can still get a kohen aliyah despite having a blemish. He just can't do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash.
No means blemish or defect, right?
That's correct. So when he has a blemish, let's say he's missing a hand, so he can't do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, but he can still, lead benching.
He can still bench us. Well,
Well, yes, right. So, right. So okay. Now, Rabbi Yishmael, Imeahi, if that was going to be your source, so Hava Mina, Hani Mili Inhu, Aval Benosehen Lo. Thank you. I would have said, that means that's only him. But I wouldn't have said the same thing in others. The Kedusha stays with him. But the idea that the Kedusha would transfer over to the daughters as well, maybe not. Therefore, I need my pasuk. For Rabbi Yishmael, on to Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Hi es aviha hi mechalelas my dorish bay. So, okay, according to Rabbi Yishmael, he doesn't learn the Gzera Shava, right? He's not learning the Gzera Shava. He says that's bas ubas, right? He's not learning this Gzera Shava that Rabbi Akiva learned to apply, right? So what does he do with that? My dorish bay, mibayle lichadetanya. We need it according to this brisa. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer Meir used to say Matam Lomer Es Avia Hi Mechalelas. She's profaning her father's household. Shim Hayu Noagin Bo Kodesh Noagin Bo Chol. That what we're worried about is that people will say if they were before they were treating this Kohen with great respect. Now that his daughter does this, they're going to treat the Kohen with less respect. Right? Kavod noagin bo bizayon, right? If they used to treat him with honor, they're going to treat him with disrespect. Omrim, they're going to say, Arur shazu yolad, Arur shazu gidal. Cursed is the one who raised a daughter like this. Cursed is the one who raised a daughter.
Can he lose his kahuna?
He will not lose his kahuna, right? He doesn't lose his kahuna for it, but people will say bad things. Arur shayotzazu mechalzo. Amar Rabbi Ashi, Rav Ashi says, Kaman karinan rishia bar rishia, va'afilu l'rishia bar tzadika, kaman kahaitana. Right? So who is it that says that sometimes there are circumstances where we are saying that you can call somebody who's a sinner, you can call him a sinner, a wicked person, the son of a wicked person, even if he's this wicked person, the son of a tzaddik. It's like this Tana that says this, or Rabbi Meir says. So that's what we are. Esavia, this is what it means. She profanes her father's house, and that people will say negative things about the father's house. Okay, next. Zu mitzvahs haniskolin, the last line of our Mishnah. Now we're finished with that brisa. Zu mitzvahs haniskolin. This is the mitzvos about the one who receives skila, right? So he said, my Tana, the Katani zu mitzvahs haniskolin. Why does it say that we're talking about the mitzvos that relate to skila? We already talked about them. Mishum de Tana nigmar hadin motzino so l'saklo. The answer is because the Tana says that when the punishment, when the rule is established that he's supposed to go out to get skila, besa skila hayagvo shekomos. We said in the Mishnah that the besa skila was 2 stories high. So now that we're going to go into our next Mishnah and we're going to go to the next type of misa, tananami zu mitzvahs haniskolin, and we finish off the previous section regarding skila by saying, and those are the rules regarding skila, right? Theoretically, you should have put that before all the mitzvahs of skila, but since we're going right into it. We were saying they finished the halacha and then we bring him to the skila. We didn't really have a chance to put this line in. Now that we're moving on to the next section, we mentioned that was the rules of skila. Next Mishnah.
You want to take a 5?
I'm good.
Yeah,
Unless you guys want to take a 5.
You want to take a 5? Take a 5-minute break?
Yeah. Okay, let's put a pause. Mishnah. Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Mitzvos hanisrafin. This is the way that they carried out sreifa. Ayu mishakin oso bezevel ad arkavosov. They would stand him up in manure up to his knees. That was because it prevents you from moving around. Right? They want to hold him still. That's the restraint. The nosnin suder kasha letoch haracha. They would take a thick scarf, a coarse scarf, and they would wrap it inside of a soft scarf. The thick one because that would hold a person in position, but they needed a soft one because they didn't want to irritate the person where it was going to be holding him. The korich al savaro. And then they would wrap that around his neck. Zemo shechatzlo v'zemo shechatzlo. Each one would pull, each of the witnesses, when somebody would pull from each of the sides, and that would cause ad shepotech espiv until the guy would open his mouth. Umadlik es apsila.
You mean like a gag type of thing?
No, it's on his neck. On his neck.
The reaction.
Right. Umadlik es apsila. Then they would light the wick, v'zorko letoch piv, and throw that in his mouth. The yoredes letoch me'ov, and that would go into his intestines. And v'chomeres es b'nei me'ov, and that would burn out his insides. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda says, Af hu imes biyadam lo hayu mekaimim bo mitzvahs sreifa. He says, if that winds up being that you guys are pulling on his neck that way, so then you're going to wind up that the person might die, and then you won't be mekayim sreifa, right? You won't be getting sreifa. El poseches piv bitsavas, rather that you have to hold his mouth open with tongues. Shalo bitova, so against his will. Umadlik es apsila, and that's where you light the wick. V'zorko toch piv, and throw that in his mouth. V'yordes toch me'ov. V'chomeres es b'nei me'ov, etc. Burns his insides. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok, Maaseh ben bas kohen achas. There was a story of a certain bas kohen shezinsa v'kifuah chavile zemoros, and they surrounded her with bundles of wool, the sarfuha, and they burned her. Amar lo, so he was trying to testify that they didn't do sreifa like you guys said. They burned her like at the stake. Right? So Amar lo, they said to him, based in shel osa shah baki. That was because that was a basin that did not know what they were doing. Right? They didn't know.
So if he opens his mouth willingly, you have to open his mouth against his will. If he opens his mouth willingly,
then that's better, I guess. Right? If he'll open his mouth willingly, that's probably better. Right? My psila. So what does this mean, a wick? They're throwing this wick in. Amar of Masna, psila shel aver. It was a wick, which was really molten lead. That was a long, thin piece of molten lead that they melted down, and that's what they poured into his mouth. Right? Minolon. How do we know that? Osya sreifa me'adas korach, because we have Gzer Shava, the word sreifa from the congregation of Korach. Malahol and sreifas neshama v'guf kayim. Just like in Korach's case, they burned their insides, their neshama, without burning the outsides. The outside of the body was intact. Only the insides were burned. Afkan sreifas neshama v'guf kayim. Same here. We're trying to burn the insides without damaging the outsides. Rabbi Elazar says, Osya sreifa mibnei Aaron. We're talking about learning Gzer Shava from the word sreifa from the children of Aaron. Malahol and sreifas neshama v'guf kayim, just like by the children of Aaron, they were burned on the inside, but their body was still intact. Afkan sreifas neshama v'guf kayim. Man diyalav miadas korach minole. Where's the source for the opinion that says they learned it from the group of Korach? The pasuk says, "Ves machtos hachatoyim." They had their fire pans, so they were claiming that they were going to be bringing offerings, and Hashem was going to accept them. Hachatoyim of the people, the sinners, ha'ela, the sinners, b'nafshosam, shenishmason nisrafos. It means that the fire shot out from the pans that they were bringing their fire offerings in, and it went into their neshamas and burned them. Right? So that means the nishmason nisrafos v'guf kayim. Ve'idoch, and the other says, hahi sreifa mamish. No, that really means that they were really physically burnt up. In the case of Korach, that their whole bodies got burnt up. Umay bin nafshosam. What does that mean, though, that it says bin nafshosam? It doesn't mean the fire goes into their nefesh. So then how do you explain that? Shenis chayvu sreifa al iske nafshosam. They were chayav misa by sreifa because of their spiritual problems that they were having. Kid Reish Lakish, like Reish Lakish and Reish Lakish. Mai dichsiv bechanfe lage maog charak alai shenimo. So he says that this pasuk, translation of this pasuk is that they were the congregation of Korach were mocking, and they gathered together in order to taunt Moshe Rabbeinu on the food that they were, on the loaf of bread that they were bringing, and we gnashed our teeth against it. That's what it literally means. So it says the explanation is b'shmil chanufa shechnifu lekorach al iske legima. Since the Adas Korach were taunting or attacking Moshe Rabbeinu for the loaf, for the man that they were bringing, charak alehem sarshal gehenim shinav. The officer of Gehenna was gnashing his teeth, ready to accept them. Umanda Yolef mibnei Aaron, the ones who learned it from Aaron's sons, minale, where did they learn it from? The pasuk says, "Vayamusu lifnei Hashem," they died before Hashem. Ke'ein misa, it just looked like regular death. Didn't look different on the outside. Vida chahu sreifa mamish. The other says, no, the punishment for Aaron's souls was literally they got burned up. Mamish havai. Umay dichsiv vayamusu. So what does it mean when it says they died? The ascha bahu migavai. The death started internally, ke'ein misa, like a regular misa, but eventually they spontaneously combusted, and they were all burnt up. The Tanya, as we were in a brayso, Abba Yossi ben Dostoi Yomer. Abba Yossi ben Dostoi says, Shnei chutin shel eish yatsu mibeis kodesh hakodashim. Two threads of fire shot out from the kodesh hakodashim. V'nechleku la'arba. And they split into four. Two flames of fire went into this one's nostrils, and two went into this one's nostrils. Vesarfum, and burned them up. Right? So depending on who you're holding, like, they burned just their insides or they burned them entirely. The pasuk says, Vatochel osam, but it says there, they ate them. They were consumed, which means that something else was not consumed. Osam velo bigdeim. They were consumed, their garments were not. So it's like literally they got evaporated and their clothing crumpled to the floor, like the Jedi, right? So, right. V'nelef miparim hanisrafim. Well, how do we know? We're going to learn that the burning happened from the inside, not the outside, and that's how we're going to kill these people with sreifa. There are other times that we have sreifa in the Torah, like, for example, the bulls that we offered, that we talked about a few weeks ago, that were completely burned up. So Malahol and Sreifa Mamish, if those bowls are completely burned, Afkan Sreifa Mamish maybe here too, it means that they should be completely burned. Mistavra me Adam Havaleh Melef. It makes more sense to compare people, right? Cases of people, right? Shekain Adam Chote Neshama Pigul, because there's actually 4 comparisons that make these cases similar. 1, they're dealing with people. Number 2, they're dealing with somebody who committed an avera. Number 3, it's the neshama, meaning that it's a cleansing of the person's neshama that is appropriate that's going on here. And number 4 is that pigul has nothing to do with it.
What
Right?
is pigul anyways?
Pigul is when you slaughter a sacrifice, having in mind that it will be done outside of the proper time and place, right? Mm-hmm. And since a sacrifice, the bull offering, is a sacrifice, pigul applies to a bull sacrifice, but the laws of pigul have nothing to do with Korach, Aaron, or somebody who gets Misa Bastin. Adirabba, no. I'll tell you that it's more similar to that Misa's Bastin is more similar to the bulls that get burned, because Shekain Machshir Lidoros, because this is a rule that applies for all time, right? The bulls are offering, that's something that's a regular mitzvah. Hanach Nefishin. So the answer is, it's Machshir, it's both Machshir and Lidoros. Machshir means that it is a mitzvah, something that you're doing, right, in order to carry out a mitzvah, right? The mitzvah based has a mitzvah in order to kill this person, and this is a burning of a parah in order to be able to get the kapara. And also it's lidoros for all generations. So it's 2 ways that it's similar. So hanach nefishin, the answer is in more ways that it's similar. It's 4 ways similar to Aaron and Korach, and it's only 2 ways similar to the bull. Man de yolef me'adas Korach, my tamelo yolef mibnei Aaron, the one who learns from Korach's group. Why doesn't he learn from Aaron's group? From the Aaron sons, because we said that Aaron's sons, they were completely burned up. The Nelef mine. So then why don't we learn from Aaron's sons? That they should be completely burned up instead of learning from Korach, where they weren't completely burned up. So Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Avua, that we can explain, like Rav Nachman says in Rav Bar Avua, Amar Kol, the pasuk says, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, that you should love your neighbor like yourself. Bar lo misa yafa, you should pick a nice misa, right? If you have a choice between learning like Korach, where they only burned their insides, versus like Aaron's sons, where they were burned entirely, you're going to pick the nicer misa.
How do you have a favorable death if death is not a good sign?
Yeah, but there's death, and then there's death and destruction, right? Better take the death rather than death and destruction. Well, now that what Rav Nachman says is true, why do I need a Gzeir Shava? I could just learn and say, well, whatever's the nicer way to kill somebody, that's the easier way. So the answer is, Ilav Gzeir Shava. Wasn't the Gzeir Shava? Hava mina sreifas neshama v'guf kayim lav sreifa. I would have said that that's not considered burning. I wouldn't have learned it from Korach, because I would have said, well, that wasn't really burning. They just burned on the inside. That's not real burning. So that's lav sreifa hiklal. That's not burning entirely. V'im yishum v'yahavta l'recha kamocha. And if you just learn from V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, lapish le chavile zemuros ki heichli delisrof le'egal. Right. So then, if you're telling me, oh, but I have to do it in the nice way, so then you'll make lots of bundles of wool around it in order to like you would burn this calf. Right. So therefore, you try to burn the person as fast as possible. Kamash malan, that is considered to be a burning. That Korach is considered burning. And now we have the Liat L'Erech Kamocha to tell me that's the nicer burning. That's the one we're going to emulate. Emulate. Is that a pun? Is that what you say when somebody gets burned up? Is that emulate? Anyway, I think it's something. There's a word for that. That's very similar. Ukvar hayu Moshe v'Aaron. I'll think of it afterwards. Ukvar hayu Moshe v'Aaron mehalchin baderech. So now let's talk about Aaron's sons Avera. Right? Moshe and Aaron were going and walking on the way. V'Nadav Avihu mahalchin achrei, and Nadav and Avihu were walking behind them. The Kol Yisrael achrei, and all the rest of the Jews were behind them. Amar lo Nadav lavihu. Nadav turns to Avihu and he says, Emas hayamusu shnei zakenim halal. When will these 2 old guys die? V'ani v'ata nanhig es hador, and you and me will step in and be in charge. Amar lahen HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said, Hanira mi koveres mi. Let's see who buries who. Amar Rav Papa says, Hainu Damrin. So people say, Nefishi gamli sabi te'ine mashki ha dehugni. There are some camels that carry the pelts of many younger camels. Right? Notice that just because you're younger doesn't mean that you'll last longer. Amar Rabbi, we changed this to Rabbi Elazar. So it's going to be Rabbi Elazar onto Nun Beis Amud Beis. Lama Talmid Chacham Doma. What is a Talmid Chacham similar to? Lifnei Am Haaretz. When in the eyes of somebody who's an Am Haaretz, right? How does an Am Haaretz view a Talmid Chacham? So Betchila Doma Likiton Shazav. At first, he looks upon him, he says, that's like a golden utensil. That guy is golden, right? Siper Himenu. So now he talks to him, Dom Likiton Shazav Kasef. Then he becomes more accustomed to dealing with him. And now he's like a silver utensil. Nani Mimenu. Now once he donates money, I guess, and now the tzaddik is the Baal Tamid Chacham is already getting benefit from him. Doma Likiton Shacherish. Now he starts to treat him already a little bit less respectfully. Treats him like a cherish, like pottery. Kevan Shenishbar Shuv Ein Lo Takana. And once he breaks, there's no fixing him. Right? I'm not sure who's the one who breaks. Right? Okay. Imrasa Bas Tully. Imrasa, who was the daughter of Tully Bas Kohen, she was a daughter of a Kohen, Shazinsa, and she was committed this adultery. Havai Akpa Rav Chama Bar Tuvia Chavile Zmuros Vesarfa. So Rav Chama Bar Tuvia gathered the bundles of wool together and he burned her up. That's how he did it. Amar Rav Yosef Ta Betarti. He made two mistakes. First of all, Ta B'Rav Masna. He made the mistake. And what Rav Masna says, V'tah b'detanya, and he made the following mistake on a brisa. Ubasa kohanim haLevim ve'al asher yeh b'yamim. First of all, right, he made the mistake that what we said is that's not how burning is supposed to be done. And the second mistake is that he shouldn't have been doing death penalties at all. This was already after the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and he shouldn't have been doing it, right? Because it says you should bring the person in front of the Kohanim and the Leviim and the judges that will be during those days. B'man sheyesh Kohen, during the times that there are a Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash, yes mishpat, then there is judgment of cases of Misa. Bisman she'ein Kohen, when there's no Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, ein mishpat, then there is no longer judgment in the death cases. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. So Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, Ma'aseh Bas Kohen Shazin. So there was a story of a Bas Kohen who committed adultery. Amar Rav Yosef, Basin Shel Tzedukim Hava. That was a basin of Tzedukim, and they follow only what's explicitly written in the Torah. That's why they made a mistake and they burned her at the stake. Hachi Amar Lahu, the Hachi Ahadrule. So in second, that's what he said. He told the story, and that's what they answered. V'hatanya, you have a different brisa that tells the story of our mission a little bit different. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok said, Zachruni, I remember, K'shayisi Tinok, when I was a child, Umurkavak Sifo Shel Abba, I was on my father's shoulders, Veheviu Bas Kohen Shazinsa, and they brought me to an execution. Right? So they brought me, there was a Bas Kohen who was Mezaneh, Vekifu Chavli Chizmuros, and they bundled her up with the wool, Vesarfu, and they burned her up. Amar Lo, so they said to him, Katan Hayisa, you were a child, Ve'ein Mevian Raya Mina Katan. So we can't tell based on a child's memory whether that's what really happened. So therefore, they criticized his memory. They didn't criticize the Beis Din as being Tzedukim. So which is it? So the answer is Shnei Maisim Havu. There were two different instances. Hi, Amar Lehu Bereisha. So which of the two stories did he tell first? If he told this one first, Amar Lehu Bereisha. So then, if they would have told the case of our Mishnah first, then they would have said, look, he would have answered, Amar Lekishu Gadol Lo Ashgichu Bey, Amar Lehu Kishu Katan Veshgichu Bey. He said, I told them a story about what happened to me when I was grown up, and they told me, nah, you didn't understand, it was a basin that was no good. Of course they won't listen to me if I tell them a story about when I was a child. So rather, Ella Ha-Amar Lehu Bereisha. Rather, he told the story about when he was a child first. They told him, you were a child, so we can't believe you. He says, I saw one also when I was an adult. They said to him, that's because the basin was no good. So they dismissed both cases. Says the next Mishnah. Mitzvahs ha-nehergin, the case of hereg, what do you do? Hayu matizin es rosha b'sayif. They would sever his head with the edge of a sword. Kederach shahamalchus oset, just like the executioners of the king do. Rabbi Yehuda says, Nivel hayulo, that is disgusting for him. And they're thinking that the style of death, having the person stand there and then collapse, is a disrespectful misa. Elo manichan es rosho al hasadan. Rather, we lie his head on a block. The kotzitz bekofitz, and we chop his head off with an axe. Amar lo, they said to him, ein misa menuvelos mizu. That's for sure more problematic, right? An axe is more drastic, more dramatic, more. I guess it's more messy.
Messy and slower.
More messy. Says the Gemara. Tanya, we learn a brisa. Amar lehen Rabbi Yehuda lacham. The Rabbi Yehuda says lacham. Afani yodea shemisa menuvelasi. I know that that's a disgraceful misa. Aval ma e'eseh. What am I supposed to do? Sharei amrato. The pasuk says uvechoku sehem lo seilechu. Right? It says pasuk says you're not supposed to do what the non-Jews do. So if the non-Jews are doing it, that's what makes it disgraceful. It's not disgraceful that I don't like how you're doing it. It's disgraceful that now that the non-Jews are using that as the execution, we're not allowed to. For Rabbanan, the Rabbanan says, "Kevin dechsiv sayif b'oraisa." The Torah says to do it that way. Lo minayhu kan gamrinon. We're not violating the prohibition of copying the non-Jews. In other words, if the non-Jews copy us, we don't have to stop doing what we were supposed to be doing in the first place. De'ilo temach, because if you don't say that, Tanya, what about this we learn in a brisa? Sorfin es al hamalachim, we burn the possessions of kings. Right after they die, we would burn all of their possessions so that it would be respectful, that people wouldn't take their possessions. That is not a violation of copying the Amori's practices. So how can we burn them? You can't burn those things. You're copying the thing. That's what the Amori did with their kings. Rather, because the Torah says that we burn the things of kings. The pasuk says that this was a promise that was made to the king, that this righteous king, that his possessions will be burned, just like I think it's King Yoshia, right? That was the one I remember which one we were talking about. That he said that we said that his possessions are going to be burned, just like the kings of old. So therefore, I'm sorry, but this is by Tzidkiyahu. So the Hachanami Kevan Diksiv Sayif Belraisa here too, since it says in the Torah you're supposed to kill with a sword. Lav Minayu Kagamrin. We're not learning it from the non-Jews. V'haditznan Beidach Pirkin. Now that which we learned in another chapter, Eluhein Hanerog, and these are the ones that get hereg, harotzeach ve'anshe ir nidachas. So the ones who get this, we're going to learn later on. We're going to talk about the different averos that you get each punished that gets you each of the misas based in. So we say that somebody's a murderer, somebody who's from an ir nidachas. Sabishlam ir nidachas ksiv behu. I understand. It says right in the Torah, person who gets an ir nidachas lefi cherev, you kill him by the sword. Elo rotzeach minolan. How do I know that a murderer gets this punishment? The time you learn a brisa. Nakom yina came. You're going to get vengeance. Nikimazu enio demo. I don't know what this vengeance means. Keshuomer, when the pasuk says vehevesi alechem cherev nokmas nakam bris, that I'm going to bring upon you a sword, which is going to be the vengeance of our covenant. Haviomer nikimazu sayef. So I know that nikima, vengeance, is brought by a sword. Ve'ema deboris le mivriz. So then how do I know that you don't stab him with the sword? Right? Just stab him. Why am I cutting his head off with the sword? So the answer is lefi cherev, by the edge of the sword. P, by the mouth of the sword. That's what it means. So you cut him by the edge of the sword. Ksiv. Ve'ema da'avid le gistera. So how do I know I don't slice him in half? Right? Up to down, like, So the answer is Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Barvua, Rav Nachman Barvua, Amar Kar, the pasuk says v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, bar lo misa yafe. That's, we're going to take the nice way out, right? You have a choice of cutting him this way and cutting him this way. We'll cut him this way. So Ashkechon dekotol avda bar churin minolan. So he says, okay. So I understand the pasuk that talks about vengeance is talking about where somebody kills a slave. How do I know that somebody who kills a free person also gets misa with the sayif? The lav kavachomer. It's a kavachomer. Katal avda b'sayif. If you kill a slave, you get killed with a sword. Ben chorin bechenek. So Ben chorin, what are you going to give him? You're going to give him choking. We're going to say that. We're going to see in a moment that the punishment, the default punishment, when the Torah doesn't tell you what the punishment is strangulation. Right? It's the lowest of the misa based in, and so you're going to give him strangulation. So now. Why does make sense? Why are you going to give him a lesser punishment for killing a free person than you would give to somebody who killed an Eved? So that's fine according to the opinion that says that chenek is the lowest form, right? That's the lowest of the misos. What about the opinion that says that chenek is more severe than sayif, like Rabbi Yishmael, right? He says that Rabbi Shimon, who says that chenek is higher up. So the answer is nafkale midetanya. We're going to learn it from that we learned in the brisa. V'ata tivar es hadam hanaki mikirbecha. You are going to destroy the free blood from you. Huksha kol shofkei damim leegla arufa. We're going to connect all murderers to egla arufa. Right, that's what this pasuk is telling us. This is by the egla arufa. So malaholim b'sayif by egla arufa. The way that we kill the calf is with a sword. Uminat tzavar on the neck. Afkan b'sayif uminat tzavar. So too, the punishment for murderers is with a sword and on the neck. Ima lahalam b'kofitz umimu orif. Yeah, but maybe it's with axe and from the back of the neck. like it is by the Eglah Arufa. So af kam bekofet to be mu orif. So too, it should be with a axe in the back of the neck. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Ravua, Rav Nachman and Ravua. Amar Kro, the pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha." So you should love your neighbors yourself. Baru lo misa yafa. Choose a nice one. So
Is it marked tonight?
we can stop here at this Mishnah. It's a good place to stop.
Is it marked tonight?
Yeah, we already did it.
Yes, we did indeed. And we will